Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. In the previous session, we discussed about service in Kubernetes. So to continuation of that, today we are going to see the first type of service in Kubernetes, which is called ClusterIP. In this session, we will see that live demo for the ClusterIP, where we can use the ClusterIP with examples. Okay. If you are keen on Kubernetes, microservices, or DevOps, or cloud native applications, then this video is pretty much helpful for you. Why? Because in real-time projects, parts are temporary, IPs keep changing. And however, your application must keep communicating smoothly despite of that. So today, this is where we understood what exactly is the cluster IP, why we need this cluster IP service, how cluster IP works internally, and then how to create the deployment and the cluster IP service objects in today's session. And then we'll see live demo for how to create the deployments and the cluster IP service object file. And eventually, while doing the project, so in that we will also see how microservices talk to each other inside the cluster. So this is how we segregate this session. So first, what is this cluster IP? When you create a service object in Kubernetes, by default, it creates a cluster IP service. This service will get one virtual IP address, one DNS name, and it is reachable only inside the Kubernetes cluster, not outside the cluster. So that means you cannot access it from browser, mobile, or laptop directly. You can access it only from a pod or node inside the same cluster. That is where cluster IP is used. Now the question here is, we already have pods. Why service? Since pods are dynamic, they can go down, they can get recreated, and their IPs will change. However, applications should not care about which pod is running. So for that, Kubernetes introduced service. So the service gives a stable IP and the stable name, and behind the scene, it forwards the traffic to the correct pods. So even if pods die and new pod come, your service will remains the same. This is where cluster IP become very useful. Let's see that a basic architecture, how the service look like. So inside a Kubernetes cluster, we have a nodes. So inside the nodes, we have a pods. Inside the pods, we have a containers. Each pod has its own IP, something like 192.168.15.5 colon port number. Now service create another IP, something like 10.102.1.10 colon port number. So the service will create on top of the pod, which is has separate IP addresses. Even if the pod deleted, it is recreated. Also, the service IP should not be changed. So the traffic flow of this service is, whenever we can do curl space IP of the service colon port number, first that should call to this IP, then it go to the nodes, then it go to the pod, and finally it go to the container. So client never talk directly to the pod IP, client always talk to the service IP. Okay. And then let's see when we use cluster IP. The cluster IP mainly when one microservices wants to communicate with another microservices inside the same cluster. For example, front end talking to the application layer talking to backend, or backend talking to the database. No external user involved here. That is where cluster IP fits perfectly here. Okay, so let's see one use cases. Let's say you have front end service and back end service. Front end service need to talk to the back end service, but back end should not be exposed to the outside of the world. So you can create the cluster IP service for the back end, then you can access that cluster IP from the inside the cluster or inside the pod. So that is where cluster IP is used it actually. And here, this is the code which we can use for creating the deployment object with the two replicas. Why two replicas? If one part goes down, Kubernetes will recreate it and service will still work. You don't have to worry about which part is alive. Service will handle it, all those things. Okay. Then we'll see here. We have discussed already. So parts we use it to create and we attached the labels. And now here is the service.yaml. Here selector is very important. Selector means service. Please watch all the parts which has this label as web apps. So web apps is the label we are using. So whichever the part has the name web apps, traffic will go there. This is where mapping happens. So if you see here, same app name we have given here. This is the match labels. Okay. And now let's watch the live demo. Now these are the two files which has the code which we discussed just now. Cat space deployment.yaml, cat space service.yaml. Now watch the live demo. kubectl apply-f deployment.yaml, kubectl get parts. So now parts are creating. One pod is up and running and another pod is creating. Now see, both parts are up and running now. Now -show -labels. Let's see. See here, these are the labels we applied for the both parts. Okay. Now let's watch for service.yaml kubectl apply-f service.yaml, then kubectl get svc, which is called service. See here, the service is created. This is the service name we have given. This is the VIP virtual IP. This should not change even if you can delete and recreate the part. And this is the port actually we assign to that service. Okay, so this IP only reachable inside the cluster. It is not outside the cluster. Now access from the inside a pod or inside a node. We are using minikey, so I am going to access from the node. So curl space IP of the cluster IP service, which is VIP virtual IP, then colon 80. See here, now Apache is coming. Now delete one part, Kubernetes will recreate it, again access the service IP. It should work still. So for that, kubectl get parts, kubectl delete pod name I am giving. See deleted. Again kubectl get parts. See it's recreated. Or if you want kubectl delete pod name. I am giving two parts.
Paste.
Then take this one and give it. Now see it's deleting two parts. Deleted. Now see it's creating two parts. Okay. Now two parts are created using the same IP. This is the VIP for cluster IP. See here again it's working. So that means if we go ahead and see, if you try to delete the pod, kubectl delete pod, you can give the pod name and it will be recreated and you can check the IP. See here, earlier it is 16 is there. It is recreated. Now the IP got changed. Even this pod IP also changed. This VIP virtual IP will not change. So you can able to access still from the inside the cluster or inside the node or inside the pod. Okay. So this is how it will work actually. Why? Because service never points to the fixed parts. It always finds pod label, which is web apps, and when it is matched, the request should be routing. Okay, so this is how the cluster IP will work. So in fact, if you understand, you go to the server or node and take the IP, which is VIP, and the port number, which is given by the service. This will be redirected to the virtual IP first, and this virtual IP will be redirected to the pod, and then it will be redirected to the container. So this is how the flow should be work actually. Now, currently our cluster IP service is accessible only inside the cluster. But what if I want to access it from outside the cluster, which is from my laptop or browser or mobile or external customer? Then cluster IP is not enough. So Kubernetes give another service type. That service is called as a node port. So in the next video, we will continue and see that video. So if you understand cluster IP clearly, could you please hit like button? If you are keen on Kubernetes master, please subscribe my videos. So if you have any doubts, can you please drop a message? So we will continue with the node port in the next video. Thank you.